Okay, so an official good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's wonderful to see everyone here in the room, and of course, hi to those of you who are online. My name is Abby Erickson. I'm the chief of the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women, and it's a really great honor to have you all with us today as we jump into this panel, The War on Women, Technology Facilitated Gender-Based Violence and the Dangers of AI. First and foremost, Taban, I'd like to thank you. Taban is the CEO of the Lotus Flower and has really been making remarkable strides in her work to prevent gender-based violence and also really to bring this issue of technology-facilitated violence to the forefront. We're really excited about this panel, this incredible group of people who are here. Taban will be joined today by a group of distinguished panelists, Mansour Basha, who's the Chief Technology Officer and AI expert at Stagwell Marketing Cloud, Andrea Powell, the co-founder and chief of impact at Electo AI, and Raphael Refin, our program specialist in violence against women and data here at UN Women. And we have the wonderful Victoria Elliott, who's a reporter at Wired, and she will be moderating the discussion. So we're so grateful for your time and for your participation. I just wanted to say a few things. I'd like to very much welcome our Global Program Advisory Committee members at the UN Trust Fund who are attending, and of course, all of you who are here. We were just discussing this morning about what the Trust Fund does. So I thought I would just say a couple of things about the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women. We were established in 1996 by member states of the UN. It really is a direct result of the 1995 Conference on Women. And we really, our main goal is to channel funds to women's rights and civil society organizations who are working every single day to prevent gender-based violence. We're almost 30 years old in 2026. And over these almost 30 years, we've supported nearly 700 women's rights and civil society organizations, empowering millions of women and girls around the globe across 140 countries and territories. Obviously, the forms and the shapes of violence has changed. And we are seeing technology-facilitated gender-based violence, which is going to be a topic this morning. It was a big topic at an event we held yesterday with the Ford Foundation and Skoll Foundation. And I can see there's going to be a number of different events as we go into UNGA. And really it's our women's rights and civil society organizations who know firsthand how this violence is showing up in the lives of women and girls and what we really need to do to address it. So while we know that there's lots of incredible digital solutions that we're all using and that can be used for a powerful good, we also know we have to be very, very, very careful when it comes to TFGBV and AI and how that is impacting women and girls. Recent statistics are showing that at least 28% of women have had a personal experience of online violence. And I read this morning, which is astounding, that 85% of women who spend time online have witnessed digital violence against other women. The Trust Fund is very committed to supporting our partners to address TFGBV, and our latest call for proposals, which of course went out last year and has already closed. We added TFGBV as a new form of violence. And I think there's a lot that we need to understand and a lot that we need to learn from our partners and from other experts in the field in order to be able to support our partners. So what I would like to do is really just take myself off the stage, and I think, Victoria, hand over to you so we can jump into this amazing panel.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Oh, wow. Hi, I'm Victoria Elliott. I'm a reporter with Wired, where I cover big tech platforms and innovation and their downstream effects on society. So I thought what would be great is if each of our panelists could introduce themselves, sort of give a quick background about what brings them to this topic, and then we'll sort of kick off from there. So Taban, do you want to start?
Hello, here we go. Thank you so much. Thank you, Abby. Thank you, UN Trust Fund, for having us and for organising this. Lorna and Nancy, you've played a massive part. So I just have to do my thank yous first. So I'm Taban Suresh. I'm the CEO and founder of The Lotus Flower, and we're an organisation that was basically born in my living room from nothing, no connections, no money. And it's now grown to, we've got 150 staff in Iraq. We work very, very closely with the communities in the region. We were founded after the ISIS conflict in the region. So we work very closely with the women and girls that were impacted in the conflict. I myself am a genocide survivor and also a survivor of gender-based violence. So I was kind of born into violence from day one. So I have a lot of personal experience, but also the women and girls that we work with, we have a lot of experience from that perspective. So hopefully I'm really, really looking forward to the discussions today, because I've seen the trends of gender-based violence kind of shift into technology a lot, and it's such an important subject. And for me, before this sector, my background was in technology. So now I guess the worlds are meeting in the middle. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion today. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Andrea Powell, and just joined the panel yesterday, so still getting a lay of the land. But I come with a background of starting also a nonprofit in my early 20s, not in my kitchen, but in the basement. So similar. But we worked with counter-trafficking initiatives to develop safe homes, emergency responses for predominantly sex trafficking survivors in Serbia, Russia, and in Washington, D.C., where I was based. And increasingly through the last 10 to 12 years, hi, buddy. The last 10 to 12 years, I increasingly noticed that the girls were being lured online, marketed online, and sold online. And over time, as I would work with law enforcement or the FBI or Interpol, we would seek to get their images down, because it was certainly a part of their exploitation. And the general response was, it just is what it is. Be happy she's out. And we were concerned about the residual impact of having their faces, their bodies used as marketing and collateral. And so fast forward 15 years, I left my first nonprofit, which is still standing, and started an initiative to really understand what survivors of online gender-based violence experience, what their needs are, what their expectations are. And I can certainly get into that, as we unpack and unfold. But what I can say is what I have learned most saliently is what starts online does not end online. It goes into every facet of a woman or girl's life.
Hi, my name is Mansoor Basha. I am the Chief Technology Officer of Stagwell Marketing Cloud. It's a advertising and marketing holding company agency. And so we build tools for in-house marketers, as well as build tools for clients to utilize and use that. I've been working in AI and data, because AI is all about data and how you use that data for good or for bad. And my first AI program was in 1998. So AI has been around for a long time. It's just in different forms. It's evolved, and now what you see as ChatGPT is the new evolution. And for the past 2 years, we've been working heavily in building tools for benefit, for operational efficiency, and for looking at things to push them out, but at the same time trying to manage the dangers, the worries, the safeguards, the guardrails, also of how to utilize AI. So I'm probably the person who knows the least about the concerns which we are talking about here, but I can address how to look at it from the lens of how can technology aid you or abet or safeguard you.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Raphaël Raffin. I'm a violence against women research and data specialist within UN Women. So to share a bit more about what we do, I'm sure we'll deep dive more into that, but to share what our approach is, UN Women's been working on technology-facilitated gender-based violence for many years, but with the increased digitalization after COVID, it's an area of work where we decided to strengthen really our the way that we address it. So within our Ending Violence Against Women section, we've mainstreamed this response throughout all our programs. So I'm working mainly on data and research, but closely with colleagues leading on prevention and how to integrate it in our prevention approach, also on responses, of course, on our work in public spaces. But beyond our section that works on ending violence against women, we work closely with other sections also at UN Women, including our section leading on women's political participation, because and I think we'll address that later as well, the impact on women's participation, women politicians, but not only women journalists, women activists, or women in the public eye are especially targeted by technology facilitated violence, and also to share that we really try to address it as part of the continuum of violence. So I heard, and thank you to say that what starts online doesn't end online, but also sometimes it comes from offline violence, or there is no distinction between the online and offline. It can start offline and continue online, or the opposite, or in parallel very often. So we have emerging data on that as well, and try to address it not as a standalone new form of violence, but really as part of the continuum of the whole cycle of violence.
Thank you all so much. Taban, I think I'd like to start with you. Oftentimes when we think about humanitarian contexts and crises, we often think of them as low resource and low technology environments as well. But I'd like you to sort of start to help us frame this issue. AI is something that we see as sort of the new cutting edge of technology, even though, as Mansour pointed out, it's been developing for quite a while. Can you talk about why how you're thinking about considering this threat in an environment that maybe we wouldn't consider as the primary place where this would be showing up?
Thank you. I think to kind of answer that question, it's really important to maybe go into the context of the background of how technology has been used in different forms and not just AI. So to kind of go and explain, I guess, going back to the conflict with ISIS, and when the Yazidi women, a lot of them, when they were sold, they were actually sold on technology platforms, and technology platforms like WhatsApp and Telegram and other platforms. So we kind of saw that trend there. And that kind of evolved into, after they were rescued and taken into the camps, we found that actually the movement towards cyber abuse, disinformation was very, very prevalent. And that kind of allowed us to work with the women in our communities around that area, and actually our partnership with UN Trust Fund. And I always say this, like, flexible funding allows local partners to be able to really, really look at the root of the problems and find solutions for them. Because what started out as support during COVID was, we found that there was gender-based violence on the increase in the camps that we worked in. And so what we did was we started providing online awareness sessions for these community members and started including men into our programs. After COVID had lifted, we realized that the women and girls were asking us to work with their men and boys around gender-based violence. And this is when we started including the men in person. And that led to mental health programs. We led a men and boys trauma project, which was really, really successful for the community that we worked in that group. It reduced gender-based violence within that community because we were able to kind of find the root cause of the problem. And then moving on from that, we kind of went into different communities and found that cyber abuse, sextortion, revenge pornography was really, really prevalent amongst teenage girls in schools. So we started a campaign to really do literacy around that. And moving on from that, we discovered that slowly that women's rights leaders were being targeted online and through social media platforms as a way to really, really dismantle them, make them lose trust within the communities, so the communities would not engage with them. So it was very, very targeted. And this came after the gender backlash in Iraq. So about 2 to 3 years ago, there was a gender backlash, and it was around the time when Jina Mahsa Amini was killed in Iran. And it's 2 years, up to yesterday when Gina was killed. And we found that after that, there was a tightening on women's rights organizations in Iraq in general. And so they would target organizations in different ways. And one way was to kind of target them online through social media platforms. Are we okay? Oh, sorry, baby. And so they were being targeted online. And now what we see is one of the biggest fears is that there will be a move towards targeting them through AI and fake news. Because in our community and the culture that we work in, that's massive for any woman to go through because of the honor-based killings. And so if something like that was to happen, you would find that women would be killed instantly within a few hours, if not by their own family members, by their partner, then by the community. And that is the biggest fear that I am seeing and the biggest trend that I am seeing. And I know it's something that's possible at the moment through technology. Is happening in different parts of the world. So it's before long that you kind of have that technology in the hands of extremist groups, extremist governments that really want to dismantle women's rights organizations. They can literally do that with the click of a button.
And Raphael, I know that you mentioned that you've sort of had a wider scope of research in how technology is used to target women leaders. Can you talk about maybe the evolution of threats that you've seen against women politicians, women community leaders, and sort of how we might need to be thinking about the threat posed to women in these very localized contexts?
Thank you. Well, we have only recent data and research, so we're not ready yet to do any kind of trends analysis because it really is a new topic that is research, and we have only initial findings, but they're already very striking and something that women politicians share. I have a few results already that I can share with you. I took some notes because I do not have them all on top of my head, but with women who shared the impact on their lives. I think overall, first, we want to, something I haven't said, but I want to say foremost as well, is there is the violence that is happening, but there's also the gender digital gap that we have to take into account. So there's violence when it occurs, but there's also women not accessing or restraining their access to the internet and digital tools because of this. So it's a vicious circle when we look at the bad sides and the bad coin of AI and digital. Of course, it can be used for good solutions as well. So on politicians, research we've seen, as I said, reveals that online attacks are a cause of women not seeking re-election, for instance. So there's a direct impact, but there's also concerns about the generational impact. So how are, and this is why it's only the beginning of our knowledge on that, how are future generations of who are girls today looking at that, and it might impact them willing to enter into political engagement and activism when they see the consequences it has on women and women activists today. So this is an important concern. And then we have, we've had many studies conducted in Latin America countries, specifically on technology facilitated violence against women politicians. So in Ecuador, for instance, 24 women politicians, so that's 1 out of 4, reported having experienced online harassment or cyberbullying because of their engagement. In Nepal, we found that locally elected women representative finds as part of the response mechanism that the most common response for them after facing violence is silence and de-escalation. And they said again that most of them will not run again for any kind of position in politics. So it's really the defense mechanism is for women to just withdraw from digital platforms. Same in Uruguay, women politicians also shared high rates of gender-based violence through social media networks, and again said that they were facing that more than men, and men also reported having faced it less. And again, that they were silencing themselves. So this is the main findings that we have currently on the impact. I mean, definitely some high prevalence rates against women politicians and activists, and then the main consequences being them deciding to withdraw themselves in the lack of any kind of rapid response mechanism. So this is things that we're discussing and visioning, and we're hoping that we will see developed soon, so that women have some kind of response access, but without any prevention to stop this violence from happening in the first place. There will also, we anticipate that this will continue.
And Andrea, I'd love if you could talk about, obviously the generation of these images is a massive problem. I think the statistic that is most recent is that something like 90% of the AI generated images online are of pornography, and much of that is non-consensual. Part of this is not only that the images are generated, it's that they're spread on platforms and chat groups. And obviously now that's come to the fore in the US because we're seeing that with young people as a way of cyberbullying and also bullying our own politicians like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But I don't think that spread would be possible without social media platforms or without these other tools. Can you talk about the challenges you faced in getting images removed from these platforms and what the barriers have been for you?
Thank you for the question. So I'm a very story form person, so I will share a bit of a more anecdotal, although very recent experience. So I'm part of a new company called Electo AI, and I can share in a little bit what Electo does and our goal to use AI for good. Although I'm hesitant to talk about AI sitting next to you, but I will do my best. Just I'm not a tech person, but nonetheless, my co-founder Breeze Liu, who couldn't be here today. Breeze is herself a survivor of both synthetic and non-synthetic technology facilitated gender-based violence. She's a graduate from UC Berkeley, originally from China, went into venture capital, has done some work in trust and safety. And in 2020, a friend of hers reached out and said, I hate to tell you this, but you're all over Pornhub. And she'd never heard of Pornhub. And so she saw the images, and as she has shared publicly, so I'm not oversharing, she intended to kill herself. But she decided to fight back after some months and started the company Electo AI, which is using facial recognition to prevent online gender-based violence, giving users their content and a token of their face to search online anywhere, and to then work with platforms to have their images removed. Her abuser, having become aware that nothing was going to happen to him because of the abuse he had perpetuated, when she went to the police, they asked her if she was a prostitute. She got no help, no protection, and the platforms did not engage with her at all, claiming that they couldn't verify whether or not it was really her asking to get the images down. So she felt trapped. That's how Electo AI came to be and how I joined the initiative as a victim advocate. So in response to a very public-facing campaign that we initiated with the New York Times and People Magazine and other outlets, her abuser then uploaded 850 plus new abuse URLs on porn sites, on niche platforms, on regular platforms like X or Facebook. And when she tried to get the content down in the United States, we first went to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. We couldn't verify whether or not she was a minor in all of the images. We went to another new emerging hotline, but we couldn't verify that she was an adult in all of those images. So we were told no on both sides, and completely understand the barriers and ramifications. So no disparagement there. Ultimately, I was in Paris, and there's a hotline there, and they're called a trusted flagger called Point de Contact. They work on a variety of extremism cases, and probably a good group for all of us to know. They were able to get all of the content down except for 142 URLs on Microsoft Azure. Microsoft Azure for the next 8 months was not responsive to requests by Point de Contact, by Breeze, by myself, until a couple of months ago, we were at a large tech conference, and I found the head of trust and safety. And I'm not going to say I chased her. I I was an assertive pursuer. And so I was able to connect with her and point to Breeze and say, there's the person that wants the content down. That's the content, that's the person. Are we good? So the content went down a couple of days later. So we had found the right person. So hurrah. But the thing is, what if you are a high school girl in South Texas or a Mormon mom in Utah or an emerging politician out of Brooklyn and you don't have a crazy advocate willing to chase people or point of contact in France? What we're seeing is this massive scale issue in which you have platforms thinking of this as content. But this isn't content, this is people's lives. And so we need to have, I think, a radical shift in thinking that we need to be survivor-centric and human-centric, because AI doesn't have to be a scary thing. As my colleague has said, it's been here for a minute. It's just that we all just figured it out. But we have, I think, an opportunity with emerging legislation in the US, and there's some promising efforts there, compacts and agreements with platforms. But here's the thing, Meta or Microsoft or, Instagram, these are bigger outlets. They're kind of known quantities who we can negotiate with. But what you're seeing is niche sites. And with these tools, there's over 300 free apps. So you can just, at a click of a button, download it, make a nude image of a young woman or girl, and boom. And there's whole forums and communities that are emerging. So it's not just like really bad guy named Joe in Idaho. It is a network of men who are creating a culture and community around monetizing and exploiting women and girls, synthetic and non-synthetic images. And, I can't say that we need to get out ahead of the curve because the curve is like way down the street. But what we can do is really start to organize as a women's rights community to look at this as something that's happening online, but impacting offline spaces.
Mhm.
Can I just quickly add to that?
Of course, yeah.
Can I just quickly add to that? Thank you so much for highlighting that. And the way that you highlighted the different types of women and girls that can't have access to that advocacy, I want to highlight the millions of women and girls that are in the global south, that are in camps, that are in areas that are really in conservative communities. They'll be dead within 10 minutes. They won't even have time to try and get those sites down. So for me, it's like a level that's heightened even more because of the scenario of them being killed and the honor that's attached to it. So anything related to that sensitive topic is honor that you kind of break to the family. And so for me, it's how do we save all women, kind of collectively we come together, the global north, global south, everyone together, but also remember the heightened extreme levels that some women and girls really do face. And it is a matter of life and death within a few hours. So thank you for highlighting that. And I think just realizing that it does exist is really, really important.
Well, and to add on top of that, as we're talking about platforms, even the mainstream known quantities one, they consistently have less investment in the global south in terms of language capacity, content moderation, people who understand local context, who could even possibly address this should someone be connected enough or digitally literate enough or resourced enough to reach out to them. And I think that's also a compounding factor here. But I think as we're on the topic of speed, like there have been some innovations or small movements on the part of platforms and developers to develop tools to deal with things, especially when it comes to things that they know are illegal, like CSAM, to get those things down quickly. And so, Mansoor, I was wondering if you could talk about sort of the technology that we do have in place to address some of these issues, whether that's hashing, watermarking, other systems that, maybe companies could lean on more, and what gaps there may remain.
Yeah, well, actually, I want to take it in two parts. Like, there's prevention, and then there is understanding how to utilize the platforms and tools which are there today, and then what is coming in the future as well, right? So it's kind of like a vast topic and kind of goes across in many spaces, because what we were used to yesterday, when you think about the start of the internet, was just text. Today it's multimodal. And as you start thinking about, your Apple Vision Pro and Quest, the amounts of channels and the ways of different ways of media which is there keeps expounding, right? So you talked about person, you can take someone's image, likeness, create synthetic. I just need probably just a photograph and some detail about them, and then utilizing AI could go really further extreme. Things which are coming up. So let me start on the future side, right? The things which are coming up is generation of multimodal experiences. What do I mean by that? And I'm going to stick to just simple examples so everybody understands that, and then you can relate it back to how negative connotations could be applied to that. So you could write a simple prompt in a large language model, or think any AI program. Give me a video of a person walking in the street with the background of New York City, having blue butterflies flying around next to me. And these are things which are, you probably have seen it in the news, like Sora or other elements where we are able to generate not just based on description, but also based on context, is what we as technologists are working on. So if I wanted to create in my field in advertising an ad, the time it takes to do a production of a, say, Super Bowl ad would take 8 to 10 months. Now could be created in minutes. So this movement of technology is for the good, because it helps us create more interesting, creative visualizations, characteristics. But at the same time, we have to go back and say, okay, how do we ensure it's done for the good, not the bad, right? So for that, I want to talk about layers. So the first thing which you have to understand is that not everybody can build a AI model to be able to do this. You need a lot of money, and the large, what we call as hyperscalers, the large companies like the Facebooks, the Meta, NVIDIA, or a Google or Microsoft will be spending millions of dollars to build that. And how they build it is by sucking information from the internet. That's why when you go on ChatGPT and you ask a question, it or tell it to do something, it's not good enough, because it's what it's gathered from the internet, right? Then you are then adding more information into it to then augment what you want from it. So that two-step process will always remain there. And what we call as that augmentation, there's going to be better tools now to do those kind of augmentation. And that kind of augmentation is what we call as fine tuning, what you guys have probably heard of as prompt engineering. You're just prompting it to say it this way or modify it this way. So the first layer, which I talked about, is that super extreme. The second layer is the fine tuning. This gets cheaper because you're just taking something which is existing and then you're adding some nuances, modifications to it. The first job for us has to be, to your point, regulation around and say, hey, there are some base rules. And today on ChatGPT, you can't make any such commentary. You can't ask AI to do X, Y, Z. We need to spread more details and more well-documented detail about exactly what you mean by not allowing them to do anything related to violence or things like that. And that needs regulation, legislation, all sorts of improvements over there. So basically what we're doing is we're training the model that if such things come around, even anybody asks for it, block, right? And setting up trust and safety is one thing, but before that, it's prevention starting from the ground up of the model itself. Okay, great. But then that's a large company. They have too many resources. They have too much focus is spread across everybody. And like you said, trying to find someone in that organization to do it and then have them staffing to be able to support this is a monumental task for anybody in the world. Even myself, I scare myself to think, well, I would have to go to ask just to, hey, take my email down or take this particular things. And yes, there's a industry which is cropping up to support these kind of services over there. The second one is much more delicate and dangerous, which is that if I have the capabilities and now new tools to be able to fine tune that model for my own benefit and build on top of that. That's where we have to start figuring out, is that now you're giving more democracy to people to be able to utilize that. I know I'm speaking a lot, and there are more layers on top as we keep going into how finance there is. But the steps which we need to take starts from the bottom of the layer, and then making sure that that's clear, because then the upper layers become harder to make it.
Mhm. Well, and obviously AI regulation globally has been quite difficult. In the US, we have really piecemeal state laws dealing with non-consensual deepfakes, and in many countries, we're not seeing any regulation at all. And again, this sort of leaves things up to a bunch of private companies to make these decisions. So I'm curious, sort of beyond the regulatory level, what can, UN bodies, large international bodies, civil society be doing to move this forward? And Raphael, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the role of sort of international bodies and civil society in this space.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, there's been, a lot has to be done, but we've seen recent progress in the past 2 years and continuing. So there is hope as well. As I was saying, although we've known for a long time that the digitalization of the world and AI was a threat, as well as it could be a good thing. I mean, it's a tool, right? So it depends on how you design it and how you use it in the end, to know what you're going to make out of it. But so there's been really accelerated and increased accelerated call for responses and increased action on it. So you might know that the Commission of the Status of Women, so that meets every year, has prioritized last year for the first time, looking at how digital tools and innovation and technology impacts gender equality. So member states have addressed, among other things, how those innovations and digital tools lead the way to further gender-based violence, and have agreed to work together and call for further developments, including normative frameworks at global level, and also further research to better understand what it is at stake and develop the appropriate responses. Following on that, so several UN bodies have addressed this question. The Statistical Commission, for instance, earlier this year, so which is the body of statisticians, so mainly composed of national statistic offices, have also agreed to work together to define what technology facilitated violence is and how to monitor and track it, so that we can have trends and we can better understand who is targeted, how, by whom, and what are the impacts as well, because we need to know more. The technology is evolving fast, and we need to keep track of understanding how it is being used, so that we have also better informed responses. You know that the General Assembly is also meeting currently, so there will also be a new resolution of the intensification of efforts to address gender-based violence that will focus on technology-facilitated violence. So that will be released by the end of the year, and it's another commitment of member states to collectively address and reinforce global response and national implementation of these global commitments, each in their country, to address technology facilitated violence. And within this, you might have heard of the Global Digital Compact. So you know that, as was said, we lack of regulations at national level, but also global level. And we lack of a global governance mechanism and a cooperation platform, because we need member states, civil society organizations, and the private sector company to get together. And there is a real lack of cooperation mechanism there. So this Global Digital Compact is being developed and negotiated. UN Women's role in that is to make sure that civil society organizations are consulted and that their concerns are included into the development of this compact. It includes having a standalone goal on gender equality, so that you would have whatever a digital response is agreed on at global level has a specific focus on gender equality and the impact of digitalization and women's rights, and that also gender is mainstreamed within all the agenda and the compact, so that whatever happens and whatever regulations are developed, it takes into account women's rights and the impact of digitalization on women and girls.
And I mean, I think when we're talking about regulation and global things, these can often take many years to trickle down the ecosystem, and that doesn't necessarily address acute instances. And so, Taban, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of how you're thinking about a sort of more localized response to this, because these types of things may not come to pass before we see a real threat on the ground.
Thank you. I think to put it in context as well, in terms of how quickly the technology is moving. So the layers that Mansoor was talking about, the second layer that's a bit cheaper to kind of develop. So if we went back to 18 months, you'd have like 5 of these apps like Neudify, where you can put a picture in and it generates an image. You've now got 300. So it's gone from 5 to 300 in 18 months. And that's the speed at which this is moving. And I think kind of creating regulation on the member state level and getting all international organizations, it's great, it's needed, but it all takes time, and it's time that we don't really have. I think we're about less than 6 months away before we have like acute attacks happening in areas of the world where women are really, really vulnerable and prone to death because of this. So for me, I love tangible projects, and I just want to see something going from A to B and then it happening and working. I think there's a technology already out there. We've got AI verifiers that can verify whether something has been AI'd. It's like you said, sometimes this technology isn't in all parts of the world. We don't have access to it. We don't have the resource. We don't have the knowledge. So I really do think it's a combination of partnerships between corporates, private organizations, to really, really be involved, but also civil society, international organizations, to kind of accepting the innovation. I have to say that, working in this sector, we're a bit slow with innovation. We need to accept it and open our arms to it and be willing to do things differently, because you kind of have to with technology. And the solution we're proposing is very, very simple. It's a website that has a verifier that is spread across all our partners, to kind of understand that this website will be able to verify whether someone has an image or a piece of media that's been AI'd, and they're produced a digital certificate to say that this isn't real, because that certificate can go back to her family and save her, literally. But the key part of this is to have that certificate, that website, accredited by member states. It can't just be a website. It needs to be a website that is completely accredited by UN agencies. It could be UN Security Council, member states. It needs to have that official accreditation, because for that woman or girl in that community, that accreditation means saving their life. It really does. And so for me, it's a combination of partnerships between everyone. The solution in terms of building the website and the technology is very easy. It's very simple. It's the partnership and the connection that we get around it to make that accredited is the critical part. And the distribution, we're already on the grassroots community level, so we kind of have that reach. We need the funding to make things like this happen. But I think the critical thing is that we don't have the time to really, I don't want to be sitting here in 6 months' time and talking about the same subject without a solution in place, because I know that it's time that we don't have.
Mansoor, I was wondering if you could talk, you obviously had spoken a bit about how these tools sort of ingest data throughout the internet. And, we've already seen with AI that the inherent racial bias of who's on the internet and whose data is getting used is a thing. So I'm wondering if you could address some of maybe the sort of technical challenges of creating a tool like this, and maybe what would be required to make sure these tools are accurate, particularly when working with people whose images and likeness is not often what these models are being trained on.
I mean, I like Taban's response because I think there's the large initiatives which we need to happen, but exactly as we are talking about, technology is moving really fast, right? And um, let me take another parallel to this. Is like one is what is there on the internet. Number two is what information do you have in your hand. So public data, private data, right? The UN has information, nonprofits have information with you, right? And then there is real time data. That means that data which is happening on the spot right now, right? So I'm going to give you a parallel in what I am building, and you guys can take a reference from this. And this is possible really fast, right? You don't need years, you need just weeks to build it. And I propose that we should fund more hackathons so that people can kind of just jump in, come and help. Like there are other various organizations who focus on data and bring right kind of multi-faceted people who have different points of view to bring them together and in a room and crank through these things really fast to be able to come that. So what I'm doing, for example, is there is public data, right, which is available on ChatGPT or whatever, and you can ask it questions. Then I have my private data, which is like all the information. Say I'm a beauty brand, right? I have all the videos or images which I have created with all my models, and then there's real-time data. Let's say there's TikTok or Instagram feed of all the images or things which are happening, right? And then the beauty brand says, okay, tell me what is the latest trending thing which is happening right now, right? So now it is eyeshadow today, or I don't know, I'm sorry, I don't do any makeup, so I have no idea what's trending right now. But whatever is trending at that point, you're able to capture that information, check it with your internal source, and then be able to create something based on that and public information to respond. So I'm taking three different things: public, private, and real-time data, and doing something with that. This is easy to do today, right? It's not too far off to be able to convert and create functions. So in response to just how bad actors can do that, you as a good actor should be also be able to do that. I am not creative or in the field to be able to come up with that, but what I can give you is there are tools which you can utilize to take that and action on these. And the different types of tools which we use, for example, is exactly to what Raphael's point is. Everybody has tons of information. You have information about yourself. You have authentic documentation about yourself. You have pictures about yourself, how you are in different situations in different locations. Those are tagged, they are reported, they are already certified information. So let's say, for example, you took a picture of yourself standing in front of the Eiffel Tower. That is defined. You've already auto tagged it. Apple has said you stood there on 2014 and did that, right? And there's enough information. So AI today can go in and pull that information and say, this is already legit. And then that is your private information. And you can say, hey, vault this. This private information, it has to be mine, and I can certify that. Now you take that and then you scan the internet, right? Or whatever is coming from external sources in real time, and then pressure test against that and say, no, this is not possible. This is what we will, is not part of that generation or these kind of tools which are providing that. So there's a series of steps which we can do, and I've kind of just like created a solution for you. But that's just one example of how you can create solutions at real speed to be able to prevent these things. And it doesn't have to be just images. It could be videos. It could be text information. It could be things about reports about multiple things which are happening, finding those things, taking data into an Excel sheet and then asking AI, okay, correlate this for me with that, right? Is this changing, or is this trending, or is this happening, or is this the same which I'm seeing over here? So these are the capabilities which are there, the tools which are now able for you as a non-technical person to be able to access and then speak in human natural language to ask for these things. So it's becoming an aid for you as well, or a coach who helps you kind of move that forward.
Mhm. And Andrea, can you talk a little bit about with Electo and sort of the verification work that you have? What are the challenges you've had sort of, and when you're thinking about Taban's solution, how might those solutions translate into different contexts?
Oh, thank you. So, I was really struck, of course, by your examples, and I think there's multitudes of examples that are similar and proliferating across the global South, but also, I think about indigenous communities here in the United States and insular communities, or even just I'm from a very small Texas town, and so something like this could also be quite the death sentence, or at least a license for sexual assault in real life very quickly in some of these smaller communities that may not actually understand how AI could possibly have done this, right? So there's that suspension of belief. With Electo AI, since we're an emerging technology tool, we're looking to kind of go at this from two different angles, and I do want to circle back into what you were discussing. So first of all, for the individual user, whether or not you think there could be content that's synthetic or not, that is non-consensual. So there's the non-consensual creation of the content. So you might have a spy cam, in a bathroom in South Korea, or, in a school locker room, somewhere in the US. That content then doesn't necessarily have to be synthetic. It can just be placed and created, or even the threat of the distribution of that content can be coercive in and of itself for an individual. So then you have the distribution. So you have these platforms that can proliferate it. You have Telegram, there's a different story there. But you have these different E2E, kind of networks and communities. So there's content that's easily found. There's content that's very hard to find if it's, encrypted, or in these chat rooms, which are increasingly becoming a more popular place to request. So there's a supply issue, there's a demand issue to all of this. So men are saying, I want a deep fake of Billie Eilish when she's 16, and then you'll have NFTs that are out there looking to buy and sell and trade and monetize that content. So when we think about that side of it, we want the user through Electo AI, or honestly any tool, but right now I'm talking about Electo, to be able to verify, hey, that's my face. I have a token of my face. I now can scrub the internet, find content, and decide whether or not I want it to be there. And with Electo, we're aiming to allow the user to decide what they do and don't want out there, because what might be intimate to me may not be considered intimate to someone else, and vice versa. So on the other side, though, you have, I'm just going to speak to the bigger platforms for now, but I'm not necessarily singling them out. But you have larger platforms that have a big problem in understanding what is content that is your content versus someone else's content. How do they take content down that they know is verified as non-consensual content? So they're overloaded, while simultaneously having the content moderators, the trust and safety teams being smaller and smaller and smaller, and in many ways outsourced. So Electo would like to be able to connect with those platforms, with those websites, to support them in more swift image removal. But how do we get it into the hands of a young girl in Iraq, for example? And I think that's where civil society and government regulation has to come into play, so that we start to educate the public on where to get help, how to understand what is and isn't verified content, and how to then connect to helplines and hotlines, of which they're not that many, particularly when you're talking about adult content. And I'm kind of narrowing in on adult content right now, because child abuse content, there's a lot of different legislative frameworks that are different, and for good reason. But then you also have the what I call like the aftercare services. So I don't know, and you can speak better to me, but if, say, that this young woman in Iraq has access to a verified tool to show her family, "Hey, that's not me," is that enough to ensure her safety? Is that enough to address the trauma? Is that enough for her whole family? Because even if she's verified it, there's going to be, trust me, some guy out there saying, actually, it's real. And then there's the debate. So, I think that there really has to be a multi-layered approach in which we bring survivors like Breeze or Electo AI or other survivors I know with government regulators, with technology, so that there's a whole ecosystem that ultimately hopefully leads to a systems change. Because violence against women and girls is not a new thing. It's just that it can happen very swiftly in these online spaces. So I think that's, I don't know if I've answered your question very well, but I think that's kind of what I'm seeing, but I, very much want to uplift that sitting in this room, we're in a very privileged place versus so many of the women and girls you're working with.
Thank you. I think you've just kind of hit the nail on the head. It needs a multifaceted approach. It really, really does, because I think even here, there's a problem with schools not knowing how to kind of manage these girls that are facing these issues. There's no mental health services. They don't really know where to go with the police. They don't, like, it's an issue that's faced everywhere, and it's equally the same in Iraq, or be it any country that kind of is going to start facing this. It's such a new problem that nobody's really equipped to deal with it. And I think that the people that are working in this area need to collectively come together to figure out a solution that's kind of global, but also intersectional enough to be able to be applied in local communities. If something like that was to happen in Iraq, and just showing the certificate wouldn't just save her life. We do a lot of community work. We do so much community outreach. We work with government bodies. We work with the police department. We do a holistic, multifaceted approach, and that's just for cyberbullying, So it would be the same with this. You can't really just deploy a technology, also because not everyone knows how to use it. There's a literacy part to it. There's an education part to it. There's an outreach part to it. There's an advocacy part to it. It's so multi-layered. But I think my main concern or hope is that we start moving now. And we don't kind of just leave it and hope that the problem will somehow resolve itself, because it really won't. It's not going to resolve itself. We need to start acting together collectively to know how to provide the right services and to provide the right solutions.
Yeah, I think one of the big failures a lot of times in journalism is, we're always sort of told, like, you have to find the person that this affected. And there isn't this sort of almost like inoculation version of it, of saying like, well, we see the patterns. We know this exists. We know this other stuff happens. It is only a matter of time. And I think a lot of times, we only are addressing these problems when they become acute, because we're waiting to see if the problem is actually going to bear out before people treat it like it's worth addressing or funding. And so I know that we are wrapping up on time. So I'd love, Taban, if you just wanted to wrap up and sort of take that thought a step further about like how we should maybe be thinking about this problem, not as waiting until we see the first issue of this happening, but how we can think of this as a proactive, almost inoculative version.
Thank you. I think this is most probably the first time where I can actually be really proactive about something. I actually was debating whether I start talking about this, and I almost don't want to talk about it because I don't want to raise awareness to it and highlight the issue. But at the same time, I know it's happening, and I know it's only a matter of time before it happens in the regions that there won't be any support. So I've kind of said, well, at least I can start being proactive to start discussing it and find partners to find solutions with. I mean, we've got a solution here. If we kind of all come together and find a collective solution, it could be a hackathon, it could be anything, as long as we move. I think that's the clear action, is that as long as we move and move quickly to find a solution, that's the critical piece. If not, like the knock-on effect, it's women and girls losing lives. It's in many forms, in many parts of the world, but actually it's also dismantling the feminist movement overnight. Like literally with a click of a button, it will dismantle everything. All the work that we've done in Iraq, if something like this was to happen, they slowly start targeting all the women's rights leaders. Let's just say it happened to me. I mean, I'm lucky my family understand. But, if it was to happen to a leader, what happens is not only is her life at risk, but then all the employees' families will force them to leave that organization because it's been dishonored and the trust is gone. they've done it to one organization, then they move to, and it will happen like a domino effect. And that's the danger, is that if we're not moving ahead of time and discussing it ahead of time and teaching people about the capabilities of these technologies and these communities, then before you know it, the feminist movement or any chance of gender equality in these regions that we're working in is completely dismantled overnight. All the money that you've all funded to implement projects there will be gone overnight. So we've got a solution that we can kind of start moving and acting towards and being proactive to prevent this from happening. And if it does happen, then at least we're ready. We're kind of not going, oh, we didn't realize this was coming. So I would say, I think we've kind of started talking about it. We really want the support. We really want to figure out how we can implement projects and get ready for anything that is about to happen. We don't need to go look back and say we could have done something and we didn't, because we really do have the opportunity to do something. And it's a global solution. I think it's implementing a project in one area which should have an intersectional lens where it can be applied to everywhere, and we learn from each other. But being prepared and proactive is key.
Wonderful. Well, again, I recognize that we're running up on time, so thank you everyone so much for your time. Thank you all for being here. And yeah. Do you want to, I know that I've seen some questions come in on the Zoom. Do we want to do some of those and then some people from the audience? Okay. Why don't we take 2 from the audience and then 2 from the Zoom? Does that sound good? Cool. Okay. Yeah. We've got a mic floating around. We're all good.
Hello, could everyone hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much for this important discussion. It was really insightful. My question to all of you is, what is the tangible takeaway for the average person who wants to help this cause and to be proactive? What can I do when I go back to my company today and talk about the learnings from this session to promote awareness, one, but also do something that's going to move the needle forward?
We're actively looking for supporters and funders and donors to get this going. I mean, we can have a discussion afterwards. It could be a pool of funders and donors, but we've got our proposal ready and we're ready to kind of, like Mansoor said, it takes a couple of months for us to be able to implement it. And I think we're in the right place because we're connected with the international agencies to be able to disseminate to partners globally, not just in Iraq. So we're currently looking for partners and donors. So we'd love to be connected, supported, spread the word. Whoever wants to be part of it, we love that. That's tangible. And I can come back here next year and say, this is what we've done and this is what we're doing. So I can promise that.
Thank you.
All right.
If I can add, you wanted to come
I
in?
wanted to add just that, at work, we are asked to brainstorm, come up with new ideas, try to find a way to implement ideas, but nobody's doing it for this, right? So I think using that same mentality of being innovative, being curious, testing new things out, because whatever we are building in our normal corporate lives or other things, these technologies, these processes, these methodologies can be translatable everywhere. We just don't see the applicability, and things are moving really fast that you're seeing that happen elsewhere. Just that, everybody wants to talk about drug discovery and figuring out how to solve cancer. Yes, but also you can do other things too.
And if I may just ask, I don't know where you work, but maybe looking at whether or not there are internal policies within your company or organization, how they address and they would address, not only internally in the work, but also for any people working within or with. And also, I think we're all responsible as individuals because we're all users of those digital tools. So to raise awareness around us and be careful and be aware of the uses we're making as well. Whenever we spot, or we haven't discussed machine learning, but how also AI is being fed by all of us and the way we're using it. So to try to be aware and say, I'm not a tech expert, but so trying to keep abreast with the developments and the impact of our users as well.
And I'll add to that as well, though I think funding and networking and introspection, which I think is what you're speaking to within your company and your life are all important. I'll add that when I've gone to recently more major tech events, so I live on my little planet addressing online gender-based violence. I get to the conference and I'm like, who am I going to talk to about? Oh, they all ran away. So I'm going to sneak up on them now. I'll talk about like terrorism or something. And then when they're comfortable, I'm like, oh, by the way. But I have to sneak up on them. So I think normalizing this discussion within your company, not to make the problem normal. This is not to standardize online gender-based violence, but to say that we can talk about this because we're in the eye of a storm, much like, you know, in the 1950s and the 60s when we're starting to talk about domestic violence, you know, talking about women's economic agency, you know, in the 70s. And, you know, we have these advances as we go, but we're at this critical point of, are we going to accept online gender-based violence? Because we didn't accept domestic violence. Are we going to accept this or not? And I think that's where it could be a company or an individual or a funder. So Electo obviously needs funds too to go to scale. But we're thinking of this as a systems change. And so I would encourage anyone here in the audience or online, wherever you are, to reach out to us as panelists and to think of this as an emerging community addressing this and not just like four wonks on a stage.
Yeah, and certainly, you know, the idea that we should be considering the possibility of technologies used in gender-based violence when it's being developed and not as an oopsie externality. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Hera. I'm the founder and CEO of Chen. I've been working on tech abuse for the past 10 years. And I wanted to build on Andrea's point and ask a question to the panel about that because I feel like I've noticed a real change. The topic of like deepfake abuse is not something that people are shying away from talking about from all corners of the world. And the fact that this is the landmark year of elections, and there's so much disinformation and misinformation that uses AI generated sort of deepfakes, has actually brought a nexus of political interest and gender-based violence into the fold, which presents a really important opportunity to get that political will to tackle and have that ecosystem approach that Andrea was talking about, you know, all the way from survivor-centered solutions to looking at like laws, media. So I feel like as an optimist, I feel like we have a real opportunity to really have like radical sort of options on this, which come from all angles. What is the most radical solution that you think can happen in your sector?
I mean, just taking on the political side, rather than talk radical, let's talk simple things, right? There is deep fake issues happening in political systems across globally, right? Just there was the elections recently in a bunch of emerging countries, tons of crazy deep fake videos which are there. There are systems which they're trying to put in place to manage that on the political. Just copy paste that, right? All I'm saying is don't try to innovate, cheat. Pick those things, use it. Their use case is the same use case for you. Their technology systems are the same for you all. All you have to do is just copy paste that, remove the heading or their title and put yours.
I think for me, if I'm thinking blue sky thinking radical, I really do think proper regulation of just the internet. It's like a whole world that's not regulated. Like there are these platforms, social media platforms. There's just zero regulation. There's no online police. I don't know. If it was to happen, like where do you go? Where's the first place to go? If something happens now, I mean, in the UK, it's 999. You call the emergency services. There's no emergency service for gender-based violence. I actually think there should be now. I think there should be a separate emergency services department in every country for gender-based violence. I think it's a very, very, and we find this even in Iraq where we work, like the police services aren't equipped. We have to train them. So I think it's something around regulation, but proper services in regulating it. And that includes knowledge around tech-based violence. So that would be, but that's, again, I like to do things now. I want something now. That's a long-term goal, and it's something that we should all be advocating and working towards. I'd say now is to allow budgets for civil society organizations to be able to innovate. We've got the solutions. We work in the communities. We know the problems and we know the solutions. The only thing that holds us back is the fact that we don't have enough access to flexible long-term funding to allow us to do these things. And that really does hold us back. So I think allow us to innovate, to provide solutions.
So I just wanted to add that our colleague who asked the question is a bit of a superhero in addressing online gender-based violence with Chen. So good to see you. And I'm just going to assume that I'll see your son at all heretofore conferences I attend, since it seems to be a trend. It's good to see you. But, you know, when I think of radical, I think back 12 or so years, there was a website that was global, but really dominant in the US called Backpage.com. And it's where almost every sex trafficking victim I worked with was bought and sold. And we were told by law enforcement, oh, they're a tool. We use them to find victims. I was like, well, you can't be the matchbox and then say you put out the fire. And so the owners of those websites would just flaunt in our faces, oh, we're pro-sex work because we're women rights advocates. I'm like, okay. And then, you know, you had a variety of you know, technicians and legal scholars saying, oh, well, we have to protect the free speech. So there was all these no, you'll never get them down. And this is just what it is. Fast forward, and last week, the last remaining Backpage.com CEO just submitted himself to prison. So for charges that are separate from trafficking, but nonetheless, Backpage is dead. So we didn't start out, though, trying to kill them. We were trying to get them to work with us collaboratively so that we could all be safe and protected and make sure that those who want to be in the sex trade can be more safely involved, but those who want to get out can. So they were resistant to that, and ultimately more and more radical approaches occurred. But along the way, what I think was a byproduct of what was a very aggressive 10-year campaign that I was a part of is that we started to get people to talk about child sex trafficking or sex trafficking in general, because before that campaign started, you had very esteemed journalists who were talking about, for example, child prostitutes. And I would say, well, you can't talk about that. You're pretty much talking about purple elephants at this point, because legally that's not a thing. But we eventually got people to talk about the trafficking. We eventually reframed the language. So it's not a deep fake nude, it's synthetic sexual violence. Or in South Korea, for example, they refer to it as a digital sex crime. And I actually like that terminology. So I think the terminology has to align with what we're experiencing. And that is a radical shift in and of itself as we're garnering resources. And then I'll close with this. Last October, there was a group of girls in New Jersey who experienced synthetic sexual violence or deepfake abuse by a male classmate, at least one, maybe more. And the way the girls found out is on the school intercom for the whole school to hear. Their names were called out and they were told to go to report to the principal. As the girls were then told what happened to them and were leaving that principal's office, tears streaming down their faces, terrified of what's going to happen, being sent back to class, their boys around them were mocking them and pointing and snickering and sharing the content. That's the culture that could proliferate if we start to let kids think that this is just a funny joke. So I think something as simple as language and being consistent with it is in and of itself actually radical.
Do we want to take a question or two from the Zoom? Sure.
Hi, good day, everybody. Nicole Hendrickson from the Caribbean. We're a bit behind in terms of this topic. We know it exists, but what I've been noticing, and I know somebody talked about a funding question earlier, is that we can't or have challenges accessing the funding at the level that the funding is at right now. So because it's so new to us, we can't access the funding to start the process, to do the research, to get those things done. Are there any suggestions as to a possible workaround, or how to use where the funding is currently, which is a little beyond in terms of maybe size and what they're actually looking for? Thanks a lot. Very useful presentation. Thanks.
Thank you for the question. I think this is where I said to donors and funders, allow us to innovate. allow us to have the resource and the capacity to be able to lead innovations. You know, when you have let's give you an example, for-profit technology companies, when the government gives them funding, there's like research and development funding. You get funding just to research and develop your product. That kind of thing doesn't really exist in our sector. And it needs to, like, if we are going to be facing problems globally and we're kind of wanting to solve these problems, we need the capacity to be able to have access to this kind of funding. So I think but also allowing, it's a cycle. The governments need to allow the international organizations and the sector to be able to have access to that funding, to be able to innovate and allow local organizations or implementing partners on the ground to be able to access it. So it's really a circle that goes round, but accepting the need for us to have and tap into this, because as a local implementing partner, it's very difficult to go through the funding cycles and make applications. So I completely understand what you're saying from how do we tap into it, and it's so new. I think the only thing that I can do is say to funding partners is help us figure out how we can tap into more funding in this area. We don't know how, but we're asking you, allow us to figure out how, because it's going to be a massive problem in our regions that we will need support on. So it's better that we're prepared for it ahead of time. And so it goes back to going to the international partners and asking them how can we collaboratively figure out how we can tap into more innovation funding.
Hi, thank you so much for expanding our minds this morning. It's been incredibly interesting. Just kind of building on what you just said, I'm really curious to hear from all of you. We know, we need governments involved, we need civil society, we need survivors who've experienced this kind of violence to be able to talk to these different partners. But I feel like we really need to motivate the private sector and those who have been leading and have developed this technology to be a much more engaged stakeholder at the table. And I'm wondering, in your opinion, what kind of arguments do you think would motivate them to feel, I know there's like the moral kind of argument, but it feels like they don't come often with, this is kind of more globally speaking, but with the same type of motivation, drive, resources that they maybe have access to and have at their disposition. And when I mean resources, not just financial, but I also mean knowledge, technical capacities. What kind of argument do you think we can make for those of us who are working in the UN or working in, multilateral or local CSOs?
I think there are two parts, right? There's the large enterprises, and they have lots of money, and they look at problems at scale, right? Take Facebook, if it's trying to solve something, or any organization, they're always looking to solve scalable problems. Smaller organizations have smaller problems, and they look at it from their own perspective on that. So scale doesn't fit into that. They can do very distinct, bespoke issues which they can resolve. The incentive, it has to come with money first. Let's be frank about that. Is like, how does that incentivization say it's supporting in terms of enabling the products or whatever KPIs they are following, or what is their return on investment to try to do that? So, in financial literacy, you would say there's something called as a hurdle rate, right? If I'm going to put some money on this, what is the hurdle rate to where it starts becoming valuable enough for me to keep pumping money into doing something? So I think we have to find those hurdle rates for these kind of solutions. Last point I'll just say is that the technologies which we are building inside are two layers. There's application of what is distinct to a industry or to a particular problem which you're solving in any industry, be it construction, be it fashion, whatever. And then there is infrastructure, which is needed to allow you to do multiple applications in technology. So technology, you have an application for yourself to do something, right? But to enable any application, there is common infrastructure. The common infrastructure is cheap because this way, when you have common infrastructure, you can do a lot more things across all. You can build more and more applications. So, hey, why don't you make me an application for my problem with your common infrastructure? And here is an incentive for you to do that, right? I think that is the approach you need with enterprises. Because it's hard for them to think about that. But if you can provide resources and people who can support the application without them having to worry about the application, but they can share their infrastructure for you to do that, then that's great. Because ideally, what you want technology people to be worried about is infrastructure and their own applications. Does that help? I'm talking abstract, but I hope that helps.
Bring more resources to where it feels like you have, sorry, like the tech sector actually does have a lot of resources. So I guess to drill down, it's like,
I would say
how to motivate them to put some of the resources that they have towards this problem, you know, instead of looking into these much shallower pools, frankly.
I mean, it's a prioritization call, right? So, I do that. I have a bunch of projects and I have to prioritize already I'm given a budget of so many X dollars and you have to figure that out. And so we constantly do that. And so I break down my projects as technology person. Like I said, I break it down into applications and infrastructure. But if you come and say, hey, I'll fund the application, give me your infrastructure, it's easy for me to do that. But it's harder for me to say, you want me to build the application also for you? I don't have the priority for that.
I was going to say, if it's kind of getting them involved and kind of bringing them on the journey, then making them realize that they can be a target, their families can be a target, their daughters can be a target, every part of everyone around them can be a target. Like making them realize that these attacks won't discriminate. It will go around kind of picking people and it could be anyone. So that's from a personal story perspective. I think from a technology platforms where, things are being shared, is it harsh to say kind of hit them where it hurts, which is money, fine them? They've never been fined. How about fining them? And then slowly, when these fines build up, something else comes after that. I think there's no accountability. There's zero accountability, and that's why we've got to the position where we're at the moment. And I haven't really thought about how that would work, but I was once with a lawyer, and when we were working on a case, it was an ISIS case, and they said, well, go through the back door and, it's money that makes everything go round. So if it was, speeding cameras, they stop people from speeding the moment they know that they have to pay something. Would that work? Would the fine work? But I think it's collectively getting people into a room to figure out, but engaging them as well, asking them, what would make you more engaged in this subject that's going to be impacting not just everyone globally, but also potentially you. I really believe in engaging people in discussions, whether it's local communities. We're very community-led, we're very needs-led, and so we include the community members in the solutions that we provide. We ask them. I'd say the same thing to the private sector. Have discussions, open the doors, figure out what it is that they need and what it is that we need, and how can we meet in the middle to meet each other's need.
And I can add to that. I've actually asked a few tech executives, what do you need in order to address this? Because there are good people. But when you're talking to the trust and safety executives and community, they aren't necessarily the people who are going to push the button. They're good to connect to, but it's not the top of the food chain. So what I've been told by those I've been able to ask this question is they need regulation and they need law, so that it is something they're required consistently to do across the board, so that you don't have to chase people through various tech conferences and whatnot. But when we're asking when you put the burden on the individual victim, and I'm using that word in a very targeted way right now, you're asking them to collect all those URLs and make a case that this is them, that this is non-consensual, they want the content down. You're basically asking a woman to create her own digital rape kit and then convince them to investigate. So she has to stare at that crime scene herself and verify, yes, that's my body. Yes, that's my face, over and over and over again. In the case of Electo's founder, Breeze, that is not something she mentally could do 850 times. So we really need technology folks to understand that, and we need the laws to mirror the reality of what's going on. And I think that you're starting to see that shift. I don't know how much of you follow this or if it's just me, the nerd, but I've been noticing a lot of big tech companies are suddenly having strategies to address deepfake abuse or online harms, and they all seem to be happening right about now. And I think that that's because they're seeing the tides turning, and we need stronger legislation to be combined with the technology innovation and with the victim advocacy approach.
Let me just quickly, sorry, if we I don't want to take too much time, but emphasize on the regulation needs. This is where I also wanted to insist on. I mentioned that we hope to have soon a global governance mechanism with this digital global digital compact. And in terms of radical shifts, that was asked to have hopefully a platform of collaboration, right, between member states and tech, not only because we all need to come in, but also because we need the collective knowledge, because we don't have, it's just separate streams of work. It's going so fast that it's hard for each of us in our own areas of work to keep pace. And noting that it's going to take time, but some national responses were already developed, very recent. Like we're currently looking at laws, for instance, and we hope to soon publish a compendium of good practices, looking at how laws but also responses have been tackling technology-facilitated gender-based violence. And like a few examples that come to my mind is Australia adopted in 2021 a digital act, Fiji as well, I think the following year or in the same time frame, and it has provisions on private liability, with some requests to provide remedies for survivors, rapid mechanisms to take down some hurtful content, but also prevention. What are they doing to prevent through the designs violence? So it's very recent. We haven't looked at implementation of those laws yet. I don't know how many cases there have been, but there are some good practices out there that could inspire others as well, and where we can see that, I mean, attempts to have companies being more proactively engaged in preventing and responding to technology-facilitated violence.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I think we're going to wrap up now. Thank you to everyone on the Zoom and everyone here. And as Taban said, if you are someone who wants to be involved, to collaborate, to fund, please reach out.
Thank you.